Hello everyone, you're tuning into the continuing series on improving Sri Lanka's country competitiveness brought to you by Empower SL in collaboration with the Computer Science Society of Sri Lanka. I'm your host Kasun Nupearachchi and I'm joined by an eminent technocrat to talk about e-governance in Estonia and Sri Lanka with its applications, involvement in the economy. To my left, I have Mr. Ivar Tallo. Mr. Tallo currently serves as an executive board member of E-Governance Academy of Estonia, where he served as the CEO from 2002 to 2007. In addition, he has many years of experience in higher government positions in Estonia, including the Ministry of Justice as the chairman of Government Anti-Corruption Committee and member of the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the Estonian Parliament. He obtained his MA in philosophy at the Leningrad State University. Mr. Tallo is currently attending the 37th National Information Technology Conference 2019, organized by CSSL, as a keynote speaker. Welcome to the show, Iva.
Hello.
So to start off, in general terms, e-governance or electronic governance may refer to the application of information and communication technology in delivering government services, exchange of information, communication transactions, integration of various standalone systems and services, etc. So, Iva, in a modern context, how would you define or describe the term e-governance?
Well, I think it is exactly what you said. I mean, it's a use of technology in the governance processes. And in the modern ways, maybe what we talk about is just the digitization of the business of government. So, but throughout the years, let's say it started somewhere in 90s, throughout these 2 decades until today, it has changed. Every couple of years, there is something new that has been thought as a terminology. I mean, in 1997, I think the UK government said, "Oh, we'll create something like online government." Because it was a time when the World Wide Web was very much in fashion. Then it was this e-government and e-governance to include different processes. For a while in mid 2000s, everybody was talking about m-government, like a mobile government. But I think it is the same governance, whatever. It is question how do we do it, and for example, I have spoken about e-governance for probably 15, 20 years, but the last 6, 7 years I've been speaking not about the governance as much as change management. How do we get the desired results? Because the governance is not sort of like you are buying yourself a new program for your computer or for your iPad or your smartphone. That clubs, I mean, you enter the payment card details and you get this program. You download it, you start it and start typing the letter or whatever. Governance is much more sort of complicated. It involves a lot of actors. It's never you alone. It is parts of society, parts of bureaucracy that needs to be convinced to use, to agree on the same principles or ways of activities and so on. So that's why I think that what the governments have found around the world was after this initial enthusiasm of the 2000s, even early 2000s, where these projects were launched, they found that, oh, it's actually very difficult. It's not that easy. I mean, the big companies some 10, 15 years ago thought, okay, we'll create a program, like this. We have the Amazon for shopping or Alibaba or Google for search. Everybody is using. We can have same for governance. And it turns out, no, we can't. I mean, the procedures in the different governments are different. Even the governments that are maybe quite close to each other from Europe will take Germany or Austria. When you go into the details how it is done, you can't take a German program and put it in Austrian government or vice versa, because actually the Austrians are much more developed in this regard.
Okay. So in your conference address and the speech made, you mentioned certain 4 pillars. Would you like to touch upon that as well briefly?
Well, yes, there are general sort of requirements which, when the time moves by, people start to forget. Everybody is talking about e-services, and nobody is talking about this e-government infrastructure. So I'm very happy you brought it up, because I mean you can't really have the services without the infrastructure. And it is worth mentioning them even now. I mean, first it is access. I mean, you can't have e-government or these digital services if, first of all, people don't have access to internet. If the offices don't have access, I mean, not only the central government, I'm sure there is no problem in Colombo with this. However, if you go to the countryside, I'm sure there are communities where their offices are still not connected with sufficient internet bandwidth. So this is access is first. The second is digital data. Again, all the data, as I said, today is virtually digital. I mean, the new data that is created. Your microphone, I mean, when you are taping, this is digitalizing my voice to save it. So it is a digital data. If you have somebody taking videos and it is digitizing the stream, it's again digital data. The same way, if some clerks are typing something, they are typing it into the computer actually and digitizing this when we want to save it. So the current data is digital, but there are 2 buts. First, you have the data that is pre-digital. So what do you do with that? And generally, governments have been digitizing this data also. Not everything, I mean, not things that are 100 years old. This is part of the history, it's in archives and so on. But there is active data, for example, if we talk about the population registry, then which, I mean, the government database which kind of records live events. I mean, it used to be part of not the government job, but the church job, at least in the Christian countries, that there were books in the church where it was written down that son was born to Mother Maria and Father Joseph, something like that. And that was a reference point to say, okay, son was born to these good people under the grace of God. Now we have a different type of understanding. It's a government who records this data. And we want to have this data accessible electronically. Not about our predecessors, but about our families, so that if, for example, my daughter wants to marry, then well, there is a record when she was born and that she hasn't been married before or something like that, So this information should be digitized. And I'm sure some of it is digitized in Sri Lanka also, but I heard, for example, and one of the questions, what about the land information? Land, this formal information, who does the land belong to? I mean, the digital maps, you can download the map of Colombo in a couple of seconds from Google. But that is not the map that shows ownership. So these are still in the hands of the government, and this has to be digitized also because this hands, the land is changing hands. So the digitization of data is the second pillar. The third pillar is interoperability. Interoperability means that if you have then this digitized data somewhere kept, so that you can use it throughout not only the government but throughout the society, because obviously there are private sector claims to this data also. They want to know that if I would go to the bank and want to open a bank account, who I am. So, and who I am is best reflected from the government database, which says, okay, in Sri Lanka, Ivar Tallo has no legal standing. I'm here up to 30 days as a tourist, or if I change the status, then it will be changed. But and then the banks can react correspondingly. But so you you need to use. The data that is just collected but not used is not of interest. So in order to use it, you need this kind of data exchange platforms, and what you need is a digital identity, because who is using the data? It's well, from one hand, it is a physical me, but it is not in the physical setting. It is in the virtual setting. I'm doing my banking, not knocking on the bank's door and sitting with a bank manager. Maybe I'll do that if I have some major loan negotiation or something. But if I'm just doing my regular banking, I think I haven't been to bank for the 15 years. Well, I've been there once. I remember my son, when he turned 7, he asked me whether he could get a bank card also, to feel already important. And I went to the bank and I asked, well, can we have a bank card? And the bank manager said, yes, of course, but you need to prove to me that you are his father and legal guardian and so on. And I said, but you can look it up in the government database. And they said, certainly, would you allow us to do so? So there is data protection measures. And I said, yes, of course. I signed the paper, and then they electronically access the database of the government, where they found, yes, digital data shows that Karl Tallo is son of Ivar Tallo, and so we can, establish identity and legal sort of responsibilities, and open the bank account. So the card came by post, and everything was fine. We didn't need to produce, documents, evidence, Xeroxes or whatever to the bank anymore, because all this came through the digital channels, and it was very convenient. So that is the last thing what I want to say. These 4 ideas: digital identity, digital these exchanges, digital data itself, and access to internet. These are kind of 4 basic pillars or preconditions that allow us to create digital services which make our life easy.
Right. So, diverting into a different aspect, in the e-government survey 2018 published by the United Nations, Estonia ranks 16 out of 193 countries, having a quote-unquote very high e-government development index, EGDI. Estonia is widely quoted as a frontrunner in adopting e-governance, where, for example, 99% of the public services are available online 24/7, and 30% of Estonians use e-voting. So, Eva, could you briefly explain to our viewership Estonia's journey to its current success?
Well, first, we started early. I mean, I've spoken here in the lectures also and stressed one of the factors being time. I mean, none of these changing are occurring overnight. Uh, so, looking back now, all these years I've been actively involved in it, it looks kind of like a little short movie clip, but in fact it's 25 years of my life. And you don't, when you are in the moment, you don't see these changes, you don't see these changes so clearly being so monumental. But there are moments, of course, when you do see it. I remember I grew up without a telephone in my house, and there was simply shortage of phone lines, and if I had to call my mother at work as a small child, I had to run to the street corner always. So I remember in '97 I was fishing somewhere in a lake in Estonia, and all of a sudden my phone rang, and it was my roommate from McGill University who had returned to New Zealand, and he was calling me asking what I'm doing, and I said I'm fishing in a lake, and then I started to it's a kind of progress. I mean, I'm now in the middle of nowhere. I'm accessible by a friend who is living in the other part of the world. So we have traveled with leaps these things, first establishing the communication lines, then changing the business lines. I mean, the good example is electronic voting, that we do not with any specialized machines. We do it just with a regular computer connected to internet. And what it allows me to be myself in all parts of the world. I mean, when I want to take part as a community member of Estonian community, I mean, I participate in elections, so I can vote remotely. I don't have to go to the consulate to do so. I'll just go into my computer. I use the electronic means of my digital identification to tell the system in Estonia that this is really me, Ivar Tallo, who is now trying to express my opinion or choose my candidate and so on. So in that sense, technology has been changing us, but it takes time. It's not overnight. That is
right. So you touched upon one of the flagship implementations, iVote. Reading up to this conversation, I read that X-Road and the Tallinn municipality response rate are one of the two examples that are widely quoted. So in the same report that I mentioned before, Sri Lanka ranks highest in the South Asia, ranking 94th, having a quote-unquote high e-government development index. Our regional counterparts such as India ranks 96th, Bangladesh 115th, Nepal 170th, Pakistan 148th. Sri Lanka in any case has much room for improvement. So Iva, in your view, how would you assess Sri Lanka's current state of e-governance?
Well, I think in some ways these indexes are reflecting the truth. I mean, they actually take into account more global trends. I mean, the preparedness is also about your educational levels. The technology is counting for, well, for a while, I mean, it was very interesting. For example, in technologically advanced nations, people already dropped the landlines. They didn't have telephone landlines, but UN, I mean, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, who is inputting its data to this UN index, was still giving out readings of how many landlines per 100 people, and I remember Estonia's numbers were decreasing, so its relevant position was also decreasing. They didn't take into account that our population had all smartphones. So, I mean, to say, I mean, there are mixed opinions about indexes as such. They show some pictures, they show some relative movements of the countries. But whether they are really so important or not is a different story. For example, Estonia being 16th, well, does it mean that some of the countries like Korea, the first place, I don't know when this last one now, but I mean, has been always amongst the very first countries. Estonia has been always lingering there on 20th place. But our services are all digitized. Our people are the only ones who are actually managing to vote around the world in these novel ways, doing other things. So who is more advanced? Those who just talk about it, or those who do it? Or those whose index says, let's say, as the best? No, they are, well, you do it, the development, not for index. You do it for yourself, so that your life is going to be better. So I would say that in order to do that, what you have to do is to concentrate on things where you feel that you could improve. You have, I mean, the index says you have been in the 100th place on the doing business. So clearly you have possibilities to improve. You can improve from creating business, making the time shorter, to reducing all kind of commissions, to requirements of how much start capital you need or whatever. These are not IT requirements. IT is just a small part in this. So you have to systematically look through this. You have to look through, okay, there is a bankruptcy proceedings, how long they take. There is part of it that can be sort of where you can use ICT solutions, but it is still mostly how your government works. IT is just helping that. So what you need to do is to rethink it in your head. The process owners who are running the bankruptcy proceedings should agree that this is a better way, and we don't need to use 90 days for one procedure and 120 for other, and 3 years for the third one. So it takes so bloody long that nobody remembers it at the end of the day why they were doing it. So you try to shorten these kind of things, to rethink, re-engineer the business processes. That is where the change comes from. And you need to have some this kind of highlight projects. I mean, some things that you can be proud of and say, oh, look, we've done it, it works, and it's smooth, and the other projects can kind of orient themselves on this.
Yeah. So, if I may share another statistic, in the 2018 Global Competitiveness Report published by the World Economic Forum, under the criteria on digital skills among population, Sri Lanka scored 3.9 out of 7, ranking 85th from 140 countries. In such a context, Ivar, in your experience, how do you see the importance of an empowered citizenry in making an e-governance implementation a success?
Well, look, it is this kind of chicken and egg question. Can you have empowered citizenry without the internet, or do you need? I mean, what is first? Do you need to have this kind of exchange platforms in place so that you can pressure the government to say, well, we think this is important, or well, maybe you need just education for that instead of technology. So, I mean, what is the first, what is the second, what is the third is always debatable, and that's why we have politics. I mean, it isn't universal examples that you can take from one country, but there are suggestions, of course. In my lecture today, I explained Estonian businesses decided that enlightened consumers are much better for their business than stupid consumers. So they trained 1/10 of the workforce. It's an enormous number of people, really. I mean, it's not a long training, it was 2 days, but in these 2 days, people who never used computers started to touch it, found out it's not breaking, it's, mice are not biting, you know. And to do it was possible to do it without taxpayers' money. So businesses found it useful for them. So the government should also find it useful for them, and create accordingly the programs to for everybody to meaningfully participate.
So speaking of the populace, another important aspect would be the level of ICT research and development in a successful implementation of e-governance. So another stat would be the ICT Development Index of 2017, which measures the ICT R&D component of a country. Estonia ranks number 17, whereas Sri Lanka ranks 117 out of 176 countries. So Ivar, in what role does, in your view, research and development play in terms of e-governance?
Well, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you here. I think that government is about the practical things. Yes, government should support research and development, but it should do itself a favor of just doing things, not contemplating what is better. Let's leave this to the universities and academics of different sorts. Government is here to do things to make the life better, and so it should really, instead of even creating these long-term goals of moving somewhere, finds the money, decides that some of it is not going to be just social support of the people, but development of these enabling factors for the society, like this digital identity or digital information or these data exchange platforms, so that sort of the life could take off and go on autonomous flight.